So I felt just due to the subject matter involved, it best to be going with the silent intro. Nothing has happened in the news that warrants a moment of silence as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Also, trigger warning.
Yes. We're discussing Till. I'm not ashamed to say it, and I'm sure Ring's not either. We've just watched this film together.
Yep.
And for a good 5 minutes afterwards, neither of us could string a sentence together.
Yeah.
It's a very hard-hitting film, but I think this is one of those films that is going to go down as a must-watch. This is going to be up there with films like Schindler's List, Shooting Dogs.
Well, I was about to go as far as to say that this is probably going to be like the Schindler's List of the civil rights movement.
Yeah. If there's one movie you should ever watch about any aspect of the civil rights movement that I can think of off the top of my head, I would say make it this one.
Yeah.
It's a long film and it takes you on a hell of a journey. And it's a journey worth it. Like, I am I don't know about you, but I'm emotionally exhausted after watching that. We literally finished watching it like 10 minutes ago, folks.
Yeah.
My brain is still like processing. And I think it's important that I don't deny that, and that we don't deny that.
Yeah.
This is a powerful story.
Also, channel business out of the way, of course, hello to anyone lurking in the chat and or watching in the future. Welcome to Media Musings. We're doing a Confederate History Month Monkey's Paw, and this is the real heavy meat of our media sandwich.
Yeah. So we always try and do the way we try and peek behind the curtains of Media Musings, folks. The way we try and do it, we always try and set the month up in such a way where if there's going to be a really heavy title, that it's followed up by something lighter and more comedic, and it's also led into by something not as heavy. And we do that for the sake of our own mental health, but also for the audience as well. And we do it because if we sat here and watched films that, this hard hitting, in the past we've done God on Trial, we've done, all these other films. If we did that every week, we would burn out emotionally and mentally. And the main point of a lot of these movies that we pick and then sandwich with lighter things, they're supposed to be hard hitting. And if we watched them every week, we would lose, I think, that sensitivity. Like, if we decided every week we're going to watch a film that absolutely will break you mentally and emotionally, eventually we would harden to it. That's just how human beings are. And then what makes these films so important, I think, would be lost in our analysis.
Yeah.
And we would not necessarily respond to them in the same way. And also because, look, I get very, very angry about American politics. You all know this about me. It should not be news to you.
Yeah.
And there's only so much ranting and raving I can do in a month before I'm mentally fried.
Also, I have to get this out now. Stupid mouse.
Sorry.
Wrong.
Ring is having technical issues.
Okay, I have to get this out now. To the Academy. Fuck the Academy.
Yeah. This movie should have been a clean sweep at the Oscars.
Yeah.
I don't understand why it wasn't. Well, I do understand why it wasn't, but you know,
Yeah, it's
politics.
it is a travesty that the most prestigious award that it got was a BAFTA.
Yeah, and I mean, don't get me wrong, BAFTAs are
Yeah,
prestigious.
for best actress.
But this film was. Look, let's just start talking about it, because you cannot sum this film up, because this film is very much, it's a film of two halves. First of all,
Yeah.
you get the first half, which is, and obviously, if you are watching this, folks, just a quick historical summary in case you weren't aware. In 1955, Emmett Till, a 14-year-old boy, went on holiday to the South in America from where he lived in Chicago, and was lynched because a white girl accused him of sexually assaulting her. She was a liar, and the poor boy's mother basically decided, you know, this was a reasonably common thing at the time, although there's nothing reasonable about the situation. She decided enough's enough, and she let them hold an open casket funeral showing the state of him after he'd been beaten to death and dumped in a river. And those photos went international. The two guys who did it got away with it. An all-white jury took less than 2 hours deliberation before they found those two men not guilty. And those two men, in a magazine interview the following year, admitted to it in the magazine interview. Neither of them served even a second of time on it. The girl who accused him is in her 80s now. Last year they found an arrest warrant for her and for her part in this, but so far as I can make out from the stories I found, apparently the sheriff at the time didn't feel the need to arrest her because she had 2 young children to take care of, and he didn't want to bother her with this. She's in her 80s. I think they found her recently, and there are attempts now to bring her to trial despite the fact that she's in her 80s. And yeah, I support that. Like, if we can bring Nazis to trial in their 90s, we can absolutely bring that bitch into a courtroom.
Like, I don't know. It feels like it says all it needs to say about the Academy, that they managed to break their dislike for basically streaming only releases this year.
Yeah. This film, there was a discussion I wanted to have around this film even before we started, and I said to Ring, I said, look, we need to talk about how you tell the story of an atrocity or an event. Yeah. Because I'm half Polish, if you didn't know. And so I grew up with a lot of Polish history, as you do. You hear family talking and things like that. And I saw a film many years ago, still have it on DVD somewhere, called Katyn. And it is relevant to this. I'm getting to there. Just give me. And on the extras of that DVD that I got from my local library, the director said, when we told the story of Katyn, we had a choice to make. We could tell the story of the massacre, or we could tell the story of the lie, but we couldn't do both. And in the end, he chose to tell the story of the lie and the consequences of the event rather than the event itself. Now, what this film does very, very cleverly is manages to balance telling the story of the murder, but also the political consequences.
Yeah, it's like...
It does both. It could have gone a little bit further. and talked about, this trial that we're talking about, the trial for the death of Emmett Till, happened months before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. Like, this was she would have known the name Emmett Till when she refused to stand up on that bus. And when that young I think he was 21-year-old preacher stood up, little Martin Luther King Jr. stood up and started opening his mouth, they would have known the name Emmett Till. And it would have been recent. They would have known the name Emmett Till the way we know the name George Floyd. That's what we're talking about here. And that's not the last time George Floyd is going to be brought up in this stream, because this film's timing is... I can't prove it. I can't prove it's like deliberate, but if it's not, it's a hell of a coincidence.
I would go so far as to say that it is a cinematic reaction to an extension of BLM.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is it was fast, if it is. I am just going to say now, Floyd was murdered in May 2020. This movie got announced in August 2020, 2 months later.
Yeah.
And it came out, is it October, November last year?
Yeah, it started production September 2021.
Yeah. So this is a movie of the moment.
Yeah.
And this is something Hollywood does. When Hollywood has something to talk about that's happening now, it goes back and finds a historical event with parallels, and it makes a movie about it. And the commentary it's making in that movie about the past event is actually commentary on what's happening now. Hollywood does this a lot with war movies. Like, there's a reason there was an upswing in movies about ancient Rome and movies about, the Second World War and Vietnam and what have you during the global war on terror.
Which is kind of funny how, or not funny, but more ironic. How we chose this as one of the as the film to say, look at the legacy of your Confederate heritage.
Yeah. Because that's what it is. Let's make no bones about it here.
Yeah.
And this film is very, very good at the way it presents that idea. It does it in a way that's very familiar. Also, to those not aware, also half Jamaican.
Yeah.
Jamaican Indian, but most people outside of Jamaica don't know the difference and don't care. Right now I'm very white passing because I haven't seen the sun in 3 years. I promise you I'm usually a lot I'm darker than I actually appear on screen, but I am usually darker than this as well.
Yeah.
The name Emmett Till, like, I attended undergraduate lectures and we had a module on American slavery because I studied American history at university. We had a module on American slavery and the American Civil Rights Movement. And putting aside the fact that all my professors were white, because that's a thing, one thing they did that was really very telling. We had a lecture on Emmett Till and the origins of the Civil Rights Movement. But one of the things the tutor did right at the start of the lecture, stood up at the start of the lecture and put a photograph up of Emmett Till and said, does anyone know who this is? And we were not a majority white class by any means. There were over 200 of us in that class. There were a lot of Asians, there were a lot of Jamaicans, a lot of people who were mixed heritage like me, a lot of white people.
Yeah.
And in a room of over 200 people, only 4 of us raised our hands. But then when that tutor then asked who'd heard of Bob Dylan and knew the song, a lot more raise their hands. Like, the story of Emmett Till it's a modern, I don't want to call it a myth because it's not, but it has the origins of a legend.
Yeah.
It's like you can see how the story of Emmett Till becomes a bogeyman story about the Klan, how it becomes mythologized. It's not a myth, but it becomes mythologized in the public consciousness and the public imagination. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, especially in a culture like America, where most of the people who will know that name and who will receive that mythologized telling of the story in this film.
Yeah.
Even though this film is actually, for a film that's, normally when Hollywood says based on true life events, you're like, yeah, okay. But no, this is reasonably accurate.
Yeah.
It plays a bit fast and loose, but it's reasonably accurate. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that African Americans, and I'm not African American. I'm a person of color, but I'm not African American.
Yeah.
That they have these mythologized stories of their own history. And these stories of, Mamie Till, Martin Luther King. There's these stories that come through, and these people are the Black Pantheon. They are the near deified Black leaders, and every culture has them. White America has the founding fathers.
Yeah, the founding fathers plus Lincoln.
Yeah, and these characters, they do become mythologized and they become lionized in their own lifetime sometimes. I don't necessarily think, especially in the case of African Americans who had their history torn from them so brutally.
Yeah.
And who then had to form a history and had to form an identity based on nothing but the fact that they were in a country they didn't belong in.
Yeah.
And happened to look kind of similar.
Based on nothing but
tone.
Centuries of shared trauma.
Yeah, exactly. So when you see stories like this, at their core they are traumatic and they are a shared trauma. But they also present us with heroes. The NAACP is very, very present in this movie.
Yeah.
The mother. And, we are encouraged in this movie very much to look at these people and see people who are willing to stand up and say no and build human rights for Black people in America.
Yeah.
And that's no small thing. That is no small thing, and it's one of those, all cultures will lionize their heroes.
Yeah.
And it's honestly sad because unfortunately African American culture and history being what it is, most of African American history is based in that trauma. Like, let's be clear here, African American culture wouldn't exist as it does if not for the genocide of a peoples. Yeah. They are the survivors. Like, if you know someone who is African American today, they are the literal survivors of a genocide. And this film, I think, really, it puts that in your face and it makes you sit with it.
Yeah.
It makes you sit with the knowledge that in 70 years, nigh on 70 years, I mean, how far have we even come? Like, how much different is it?
Yeah.
And I think that's what this film is doing. Like, this film is not an accident, okay? And I think it's really important to remember this film can, should, and does exist within its own context as a film about Emmett Till.
Yeah.
But if you are watching this film in 2022, 2023 when it's released, and you are not also thinking about George Floyd, you're missing, and Breonna Taylor and all those other names, you are missing the point of this film, I think. This film is so important. You know, this is why when black people are killed in America now, we say their names.
Yeah.
We remember the people who were killed, not just the killers. Because it's so important that we never get to the point where it can just be hidden away. Like, and I think it is just worth talking about. We got quote-unquote justice for George Floyd. His killer went to prison and will be in prison for a long, long time. But that was by no means guaranteed. Like, people fought for that. I in Britain was donating to funds to support the legal case against that bastard.
Yeah. You
know, the public, international public outcry and pressure required. Don't be mistaken. He would not have been, charged and sent to prison if not for the pressure.
As a counterpoint, I'm gonna wait until you finish your drink. As a counterpoint, Rittenhouse is currently working as an intern for Marjorie Taylor Greene. And is basically being groomed to be the next Trump.
Did you see the reference to Rittenhouse in this movie? Do you spot it, blink and you miss it?
Maybe.
Oh, I mean, the reference is there.
Are you talking about the kid with the cap gun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a deliberate,
yeah.
There's, I genuinely don't know if that happened. I wouldn't surprise me, but the fact that point was that was made and included in the film, whether it happened historically or not.
Yeah.
Like, if you're looking at that and you're not thinking of the little racist bastard, again, you're missing the point.
Well, I mean, if you're not, you could be taking it as an example of the, as poignant set dressing.
Yeah.
Which it works very well as well.
Yeah.
It can be taken just as straight, threatening set dressing.
Yeah. And I think that brings us to our main point of this film. This film knows you know who Emmett Till was.
Yeah.
This film knows you know, and this film makes sure you feel sick to your stomach. Like, the first half of this film it's not a docudrama. It's not dramatic. Film. It's a psychological thriller.
Yeah.
And it's not being subtle about it. I think we were less than 10 minutes into the movie. And I literally messaged Ring and I was like, horror movie tropes, or am I projecting because I know what's coming?
And I was like, I'm not sure. And then I'm like, no, no, you're not.
Yeah, long lingering silent shots, the music going flat when the mother's face drops, conversations that insinuate and have a lot of, they say nothing and everything all at once. Even the wallet he buys with the white girl in the thing, that hat sticks in your craw because you know what's coming.
Yeah.
You know, and it very much, I think I said to Ring, and I stand by the statement of, you know, in horror movies, that moment where you've just gone into a dark room and you can hear the cymbals on the monkey banging, and they're banging, and they're the only sound, and like the psycho is about to jump out at you and like try and murderize you.
Well,
The first 15 minutes of this movie had that vibe.
Oh no. Like I'd say they managed to drag out that vibe all throughout, like all throughout the first half of the movie. The first half of the movie is basically a psycho thriller, like Ratchet using all of the horror, like all the subtle horror film cinematography and score tricks to ratchet up the tension that's already there from the dramatic irony.
Yeah. And it's like, even to the point where he's on the train heading south to see his cousins for the summer, and he gets tapped on the shoulder and told, time to move, time to go to the back of the train.
Yeah.
And even to the point where I was just like, Rosa called, she said she ain't moving.
Yeah. Oh, I want to say something about that, about that scene. So about the cinematography of that scene.
Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
No, so first we have the shot of Emmett Till's mother, watching the train leave, and it obviously looks like a green screen effect from a movie of the same period.
Yeah.
And then, we have, everyone having to move to the back, and the train goes through a tunnel and it gets blinding, and the screen is washed out with white.
Yeah. And then but you're on Emmett and he's looking out the window and look, the whole film, like, some films can just do that. Like when Hitchcock has got a lot to answer for.
Yeah.
But this film, the first half of this film is a psycho thriller, because the mother is very insistent throughout the first quarter of this film when she's talking to Emmett. She's telling him, when you're down there, behave yourself, mind your P's and Q's, don't talk back to white people, make yourself small, she says to him.
Yeah.
And look, my mother had that conversation with me in 2014 before I travelled to America, because she was like, don't piss off any white people over there, they'll shoot you.
Yeah.
Because my mother knew what I was like, and like I said, I'm reasonably white passing, or at least I am till the sun hits me for a week or so. And Emmett, and what struck me about Emmett is he was this bright, bubbly child, and he was a child. He was 14 years old.
Yeah.
Buying his first wallet, and he bought it because he liked the picture of the actress in it. And like he lives in this bubble in his world where he's asking for a wallet in the shop while his mother's just being told by the door staff, basically, you're not welcome here. If you want to buy our products, go buy them in the basement where white people don't have to look at you.
Yeah.
Like, that's what's been said in that conversation she has with the doorman. When he says there are shoes in the basement, and she asks, do your other customers know that's where they are as well? Like, that's the conversation that's happening there. And Emmett is oblivious to this. As you would hope a 14-year-old boy would be. You wouldn't want a 14-year-old you wouldn't want to put a 14-year-old through knowing that. And his immaturity, it does come across as immaturity, but it's not, it's innocence. But his innocence is very much thrown into contrast to his cousins.
Yeah.
when he does get down south. But before he goes, his mother's telling him and telling him and telling him. And he keeps telling her, Mom, I know, I get it, I know, I get it.
And as I said, as I commented in our pre-show chat, he knows, but he doesn't know.
Yeah. And it's like, he knows in the way I thought I knew America. Like, I had studied America to undergraduate level.
Yeah.
I was well versed in American politics and history. I knew American history better than Ring knew American history. Like, I told Ring about something in their own hometown they didn't know about.
Like, to be fair...
Go on.
To be
Just
fair... Yeah, to be fair... The large majority of my schooling was atrocious indoctrination.
Yes, but you did go to a public high school, so you should have been made aware of it. For those who don't know, who may have missed you, I've mentioned it in the past, Ring's hometown has a former Japanese internment camp.
Yeah,
and I want to tell Ring it was there.
Yeah, well, no, so I knew it was there. I didn't know it was an I knew it was there. All that I was taught about it in high school was that Italian prisoners of war were kept there.
Yeah, because it was also used for that.
Yeah.
Now, what I'm getting at here is, I have family across America. At the time, I had an aunt in Connecticut. My godmother lives in Atlanta, Georgia, for some reason. I don't know what she's doing there, but yeah. And she's black. Her family are black. She's got 3 black sons. Yeah. I've got family in Arizona. I know America, or I thought I knew America. I knew. You go over there, you keep your head down, your mouth shut, and you don't interact with the locals unless you know them. They will be blatantly racist to you. Just nod and smile, because if you don't, they will put a bullet in you. Like, this was the opinion. Like, I had watched both Obama elections from the outside. I knew exactly how racist America was.
Yeah.
I still got culture shock when I landed in Tennessee and you took me to a town next to a military airbase, and the only black people we saw for the 3 or 4 days we were there was that one woman who walked into Chick-fil-A with 8 children. Oh, and the teenage boy behind the counter who was serving us.
Yeah.
Like, I was well aware you were sticking to the white areas of the country. Which, why wouldn't you? We were traveling cross country. Yeah. The country's majority white. We were traveling across the Midwest.
Yeah.
Like we saw more Stetsons than black people. Let's be clear here. So I knew what I was getting into. I thought I knew. Still didn't prepare me for landing. And the guy at the border questioning me about my motives for visiting America, and asking me about my religion, because I happened to look vaguely Middle Eastern when I got a bit of a tan.
Yeah.
Still didn't prepare me for the 6'2" guy. Actually, no, that's another black person I saw in America, but 6'2" black guy with dreadlocks walking towards me with what I could only describe with civilian eyes as a machine gun, as I'm trying to get across the border, and my hands are sweating so badly they have to take my fingerprint 3 times. Like, I was not prepared for that. Like, I thought I was prepared. I'd read all the books. Yeah. I was, like, what I'm getting at is I knew. I had read the books. I'd grown up reading To Kill a Mockingbird and all these other American classics. I had studied A Streetcar Named Desire at A-level for English literature. I knew what America was like. But I didn't know. And you can't know until you've lived it. And that's what you see happening with Emma in this film. Yeah. Like, he thinks he knows. he can recite his mother's lecture. You know, his mother's, at this point, his mother's said it so often he can recite it. But he doesn't know. And this is the thing. You can be told till you're blue in the face. But until you've seen it and until you've lived it, and until you've had some stranger in an Illinois gas station,
Missouri.
I'm sure, no, it was Illinois because there was a picture of Lincoln in the gas station.
No, there were two separate gas stations. The Illinois was the Lincoln next to the Confederate flag display, and then the Missouri is what you're thinking of.
Oh, the Missouri was the white woman.
Yeah.
Yes. Less said about that one, the better. But yeah, you don't know. Like, you really don't know. And we think we know in Britain because we're like, we have racists too. Like, we exported our racists to America. They can't be that different. They really are, I promise. They're very different. And they're very different across different parts of America as well. Like, the reactions we got in Tennessee were very different to the reactions we got in South Dakota. Were very different to the reactions we got in Montana.
Yeah.
Like, we you know. And I'm sure they'll be very different to the reactions we get when I eventually arrive in Maryland.
Yeah.
the thing, folks. And to an extent, you know, that's why we picked Maryland as well. Like, I wanted to live somewhere with a lot of black people.
Yeah.
Because, yeah. It's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons. But what I'm getting at is this boy and his innocence. And this is the tragedy of Emmett Till. The tragedy is not... Well, it is that he was murdered, but it's that he died because he was innocent. He died because his mother dared to raise him in a society and a culture and in a way that didn't think there was anything wrong with just being a regular teenage boy.
Yeah.
That's why he was murdered. For being a typical teenage boy who probably told a pretty girl that he liked her or said something that, you know. And do I believe he grabbed hold of her and bent her over the counter and told her that? No, because 14-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Do I believe he probably told her she was pretty and probably wolf whistled at her as she came out the store? Yeah, again, 14-year-old boy, that's far more believable if nothing else. Neither of those actions justify murdering him. And, you know, it's one of those things, this film is really good at... It says things without saying them.
Yeah.
Like, we get well into an hour into this film. Like, it's after the funeral before anyone mentions the Klan outright.
Yeah.
Before anyone mentions that this might have been a racially motivated attack outright.
Yeah.
Before anyone mentions the NAACP. And yet it's there from right at the beginning when she's talking about how her mother left and why and, you know, what it's like down there. And it's all because it takes that horror trope of not naming the monster. Yeah. Like, if his mother had have said in the first 5 minutes of the film, Emmett, you're going somewhere where the KKK is still active, mind your fucking manners or they'll murder you. That would not have had us all feeling sick and on the edge of our seats for an hour.
Yeah.
But she didn't. She insinuated and she tried to tell him without telling him because she still wanted to protect a little bit of his innocence.
Yeah.
And that's understandable. It very much is. It's not her fault. But that innocence, that lack of understanding, her, not just hers, but everyone in his life, no one sat him down and said, Emmett, do you know what they do to black boys round here? And actually had that proper conversation with him. And it shows.
Yeah, it's like we get hints of it, but we don't. They don't give him the real talk.
Yeah. And honestly, they shouldn't have had to. It was, someone said you had to have that conversation with your black son now, I'd be saying, fuck you, it's 2023.
Yeah.
That should not be necessary, and the argument should be that's a conversation we shouldn't have to have, not that's a conversation we're having. Although, again, show me an American mother with a black son who's not talking to him about how to answer police and how not to get yourself murdered at a traffic stop.
Yeah.
Like, I have a friend, lives in Illinois, black friend, transgender man, and he's been pulled over by cops 3 times in the last year. For various reasons. Once he was just pulled over. Once they were at a house on his street and they were sending him round a diversion. Once his car had gone off the road and the cop was checking to see if he was okay in the car. And the cop turned out to be very reasonable in all 3 cases. That did not stop me messaging furiously every time I got the message that a cop had, was even in their vicinity. I live in Britain. I know the Stephen Lawrence story. That's a name to Google for you folks. I know that story. I also know the name George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all these other names. And it's not fair. And that's what this film is making the point of. It's not fair and it's not right. That what are we now? 70 odd years after Emmett Till died?
Yeah, just shy of 70.
Just shy of 70 years.
Yeah.
It's not fair that we still have to tell our children when they are not white that their life isn't worth the same as white kids, or that they have to be more careful than white kids. It's not fair. And it's not right. And that's what something Emmett embodies in this film really early on, is this sense of he's in this bubble, he's untouchable. But he's untouchable because his mother has raised him with an unshakable belief in the sanctity of his own life.
Yeah.
Like, he never once genuinely fears what's coming. Because he never once in his life has been faced with the fact that his life is worth any less than anyone else's.
Like, even as they're grabbing him, he's putting on his socks.
Yeah, like, it doesn't compute for him that he's dressing himself for death. He doesn't. He probably thinks they're going to take him outside, give him a few kicks and go away.
Yeah.
Like, or they're going to take him to the police station or something. Like, it doesn't compute for him what's coming. And that it's that cognitive dissonance of he doesn't know, but we do.
Yeah.
And that then puts us in the role of his mother in this film. Like, he doesn't know, but she does. She knows what the South is like.
Yeah.
Like, she's... And to anyone else watching this, you look at it and you think, that's just an overprotective mother. She's never been away from him. He's 14 years old. She's just overprotective. But everything she says, like when she talks, when she's warning him, when she tells her husband she's worried, when she's... it comes across very much overprotective and helicopter parent. Except for the fact that you know she's right.
And it also comes across as it much less once he gets down there and it's his cousins that are basically doing the same thing.
Yeah. Like his cousins are telling him to behave himself. His cousins are dragging him out of the place. You know, his family is still picking cotton. And his family, like, there's a when he turns to his uncle and they're talking about the cotton, and his uncle says, "We pick the cotton, and Mr. So and so owns the land, and he takes his share." That's like, did you notice something about that field they were picking cotton in? Did you notice something about the people in that field? I'm asking you, Ring, seriously, did you notice?
That they were all black?
Mm-hmm. They were all black, to a man and woman. They were black.
Yeah.
They didn't own the field, but they were still working the field. That was not an accident by the director and the casting director in that scene. Like, and then noticing his ring.
Yeah.
That was not an accident. Because what's a black boy doing with a big ring like that on his finger?
Yeah.
It sticks out like a sore thumb. That's why his mother didn't want him to wear it.
Yeah.
Like, it just, you know, it for the same reason, if you're going on a night out, you don't go out in a lot of jewelry, because if you get drunk, you will get stolen. Like, yeah. And all of these little things that I said, like, for my money, based purely on that scene, what offended that girl behind the counter? Because he was very respectful. He walked up, he said, "You're pretty, you look like a movie star. Look, I've got a picture, look, see, you look like a movie star." He didn't touch her.
Yeah.
Didn't lay hands on her. But what did he do that so deeply, deeply offended her?
I'm going to let you say it because you mentioned it in our pre-chat.
Yeah, because I mentioned it as it happened, even before the end of that scene. He puts his hand in the candy jar. Something you've got to understand about racists. They are wholly convinced of their superiority of their skin colour. They also somehow think not being white is catchy. They just do. Okay. I learned from a very young age that there are certain things you don't do around white people. My own aunt, at my cousin's second or third birthday, I'm only like a year older than them. I don't know them well anymore, that's why I don't know exactly how old they are. I think I'm like a year older than the eldest. My mum's Jamaican. My aunt's Polish. Her husband's white. On my dad's side, because my dad's Polish. So we go to the party. And you know how kids do? When there's a buffet out, they try bits of food and they put them back and stuff. All doing that. All these white kids are doing that. And she doesn't say a fucking word. I know this story because my mother told me this story multiple times. And I've had other members of family tell me this story. I don't remember it. Story goes, there was a bowl of what Americans would call chips, crisps, on the table. And the kids are all diving in, taking some for the plate and what have you. And I took one, tried it, didn't like it, and put it on a paper plate I was holding. She dived in before any of the other kids could touch it and threw the whole bowl away. Because my dirty non-white hand had touched it. That to me, like watching that as a non-white person,
yeah,
that's what offended her. that she would have to put her hand in the same jar as a black man. That's what offended her about that moment. Like, if the event went down in the way the film portrays there, that's what offended her. She was already gonna say something about that boy before he whistled outside. And you know, when you hear black people talk about white woman tears, that's the kind of behaviour they're talking about. The kind of behaviour that makes them the victim so they can weaponise white power and white supremacy against other people. And the only reason Emmett would have not known what he was doing was so offensive to white people is if he'd never been in a situation where him doing that was deemed offensive in the past. And the only way that happens is either he grew up in an all-black neighbourhood or he grew up in a non-racist environment. Probably a combination of the two. Like, his mother seems very much, her entire sort of friends and family are all black. So there's no there. So he has no reason to know that his hand is not welcome to reach into the same candy jar as white people. He has no reason to know that he's not allowed to tell a pretty girl that she's pretty just because she's white. Like, that's not gonna, his mother said, don't offend these white people. That's not gonna ping in his brain as being offensive.
Yeah.
That's gonna ping in his brain that I was telling a pretty girl she was pretty. Like, what's wrong with that? I was buying some candy, what's wrong with that? But as someone who's not white and who grew up having to deal with racists, the minute he put his hand in that jar, he's like, I don't want to say he signed his own death warrant because that's not fair to the child.
Yeah.
But from the point of view of the racist, he signed his own death warrant when he put his hand in that jar. Because that's, you know,
Right.
there's the idiot of getting caught with your hand in the candy jar, getting caught with your hand in the cookie jar.
Yeah.
That's what that's an allusion to. And it's just like whether he literally put his hand in a candy jar or whether it's an idiomatic allusion. Again, nothing he did. Like, he was killed for existing. He was killed because he dared to exist in a way that wasn't afraid.
Yeah.
And the way this film pitches that and shows you that is so, like, again, it's a psycho thriller. In the first half of this film is a psycho thriller. I sat watching it feeling physically ill.
Yeah. I'm still surprised that it's like PG-13.
Oh yes, we're getting to that. We're getting there. So, for those who may be concerned, it doesn't show the beating. You hear it off screen. You hear beating. You hear screaming. But you do see the body. And now look, even Silence of the Lambs didn't show a fully bloated, a fully, like, the state of a body.
Yeah.
Look, when bodies go into water, when they're put into rivers, they're not pleasant when they come out. Like, she was not joking when she, like, the idea that you could probably smell him from outside the funeral home. Yeah, that's probably accurate. It's a horrific. It makes the body look horrific, even when it hasn't been beaten to death. And I can very much understand why, like, they had to use the ring. Like, historically, they had to use the ring to identify him.
Yeah. But though, I mean, given the subject matter, like, and how it's portrayed on screen, I can see it. Like, I'd personally rate it as a, strong PG-13 or a soft R. Though,
I will be honest. If you told me you were showing this to a senior year history class in America, 18-year-olds, I would not necessarily agree. I mean, they're adults. Well, they're adults in the UK. If you told me you were showing this to an A-level class, 17, 18-year-olds in the UK, I'd be like, give them fair warning, because I wouldn't want someone to watch this movie and not be well prepared for what's coming.
Yeah.
And the thing is it's the multiple levels of irony of this movie. If you see the title of this movie and you think you know, bitch, you don't know. You don't know until you've seen this movie.
Yeah.
Like the multiple levels of dramatic irony. You don't know.
And like I said, all throughout the first half of the movie, everything builds off that dramatic irony to make the first half of the movie basically the perfect psycho thriller.
Yeah. And it's like, and I think what struck me near the middle of the movie, because we're getting to sort of discussing that, is the helplessness of the characters. Yeah. Like you expect teenage boys to be like in there and ready to give them a good fight and everything else. You expect when a man's house is being like someone's knocking on his door and wants to kidnap a child in his care, you expect him to reach for a shotgun and fight back.
Yeah.
And they just don't. And I think this movie really, it makes the point really well of that was not their fault and they are not to blame, because we talk a lot on Media Musings about decide the price of your integrity, decide what you're willing and not willing to put up with. And we say this a lot. We said it when we did, I mean, most notably we discussed it when we did God on Trial.
Yeah.
Where I sat there and I said, look, every human being has a price. Every human being has a line in the sand, and every human being knows what they are willing to stand up and die for. And there's nothing wrong with wherever you draw that line, but know where the line is.
Yeah. And if I know it's jumping further forward in the discussion or in the plot, but I feel that this scene is very relevant to the discussion. Is Preacher's monologue to Mammy about it wasn't just two men there.
No, it was the entire Mississippi legislature, the police force, all the power, all the authority. And it wasn't just his own three boys he had to think about. He had to think about every black person in the state.
Yeah.
And this is a thing American culture does and requires of black people that I don't necessarily agree with. It requires them to think in a way that it doesn't require of white people. We all saw it. We've all seen evidence of this and stories of this where, you know, police will come out after shooting a black person and say, oh, I panicked. Okay, but you are literally trained not to do that.
Yeah.
And you are expecting the civilian who you are pointing a gun at to be thinking clearly and to be calm and to not freak the fuck out. Like,
you know, to make a more poignant and recent example, you know, white nationalist shoots up a school, crickets. A trans person shoots up a school, and suddenly
they want gun control.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, yeah. You can't be on the hormones; they'll turn you into a psychopath.
Yeah. They don't, by the way, folks, just putting that out there. But, you know, and they do this thing, there's like black boys in America. I know, like, I've got friends in America with black children and non-white children. And, like, I've even seen, like, there's YouTubers and things who I follow who've got white kids. And their kids are not allowed to play with a toy gun in the street in case a cop sees them. Like, they're told that. That, you know, we're watching America and we're watching parents having to buy ballistic shields for their 3-year-olds to fit in their backpack. And I saw one YouTuber who bought a ballistic shield for her 15-year-old and also some blood pellets, so that if a shooter comes into her school, she can lay down, put the ballistic shield under her shirt, bite the blood pellet, let it leak out of her mouth, and play dead. And yet, and even in that scenario, we are expecting a 15-year-old child. You are in America. Americans are training their children to respond in a crisis event like grown-ass adults. And like school shootings is a separate issue entirely, but I think it speaks to this thing with kids, like, and this has been done to black kids for a long time. Like, you see it all the time. People assume black boys are older than they are. Like, a white 17-year-old shoots someone, they're a 17-year-old boy. A black 17-year-old shoots one, they're a 17-year-old man. Like, that happens routinely. Britain and America. I've seen that happen. Yeah, in like newspaper headlines and things. Like, non-white girls from a young age, by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I was being sexually harassed. And yet the white girl next to me was not. Because people look at non-white children and they expect us to be older than we are. They have this fear of us. There was a study done of medical professionals in America, and a not insignificant percentage of medical professionals still believe that black skin is thicker and less prone to being pain than white skin. Like, is physically thicker, and therefore you have to press harder to get a needle into it, or it's not going to feel as much pain. They think black people feel pain less. Like, medical professionals. And not just in America, in the UK as well. I'm an equal opportunities anti-racist. I don't. Yep. And, if a black woman in New York City is something like 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman, because her pain will not be taken seriously, she will not be taken seriously, and she will be deemed attention-seeking or drug-seeking if she asks for help, because she's black. Even when you correct for level of education, income, even the hospitals they're in, all other things being equal, she's 5 times more likely to die than a white woman at the same hospital. And it's because there's this culture that assumes that non-white people and more mature. It's like, I didn't realise Emmett Till was 14 years old. Like, 14 years old. And yet, this film, again, shows that a courtroom had no problem believing that he would bend a white woman over a counter and tell her it was okay because he'd fucked white women before. At 14 years old. Would they believe that of a white boy, or would they say he's too young to even know what that means?
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's very, very telling the way white people respond to non-white people. And what this film does, it doesn't name that monster. Like, we've talked about this a little bit already, but I'm going to come back to it because it's so important. Like, the funeral and the return of Emmett's body. Like, what you see is, this is a movie of two parts, but the center is a really interesting way of bridging it.
Yeah.
Because he dies.
Like it's very much like two separate movies, you know, stitched together, but the transition is damn near seamless.
Yeah. And the transition is from he dies, she wants his body back. The solicitor, lawyer, civil rights activist talks her into releasing photographs. She goes to see the body. For me, the transition moment in this movie for me is when the body's brought back.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is she's had the news, and when she first got the news that he'd been killed and he was dead, she dropped. Which, of course she did. Her son's just been murdered. Of fucking course she did.
Yeah.
And there was screaming and crying. And everything else. But even that, the way that was filmed was very horror movie as well. Like, instead of hearing the screaming and the crying, they gave it a sepia filter, pulled back so you could see everyone, and you just watch them scream without any audio.
Yeah.
And that tiny little bit of the score in this movie,
yeah.
The guy who wrote this score, he is well one to watch. And then you've got,
like, seriously, keep an eye out for scores done by Abel Kozianowski.
not a bad attempt, Kozianowski, yeah. I'd probably mangled it as well, but yeah, keep an eye out for that guy. He's good. So she drops to the extent, right, that her partner at the time arranges to have a wheelchair for her for when they go to collect the body from the train station. Because the fear is that if she's not in a wheelchair and she sees the book, she's going to drop again. And, like, that's not unreasonable. That is not unreasonable. But for me, the moment, like, the learning of the death, it's all done in under this veil of silence. Like, it's a very quiet part of the movie.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's a commentary not just on the Till case, but on the politics around this movie and its context of, there's a veil of silence going on here of, 70 years nigh on, in just this silence. And America, broadly, as a culture, has not reckoned with the murder of Emmett Till.
Yeah, well, lynching wasn't made a federal crime until March 2022.
Exactly. I wonder if they knew this film was coming. obviously things are going to ramp up as we get closer to the anniversary in 2025.
Yeah.
Like, as we get closer to the 70-year anniversary, that's going to happen. Like, it's 2022, it's like 20 years after his mother died. She died in 2003.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's what's going on here. But for me, and I don't know about you, Ring, this movie hinges. You've got the scene in the railway station where the body arrives. And it's almost like a really short middle act that you've got here. Yeah. That's bookended by the news being delivered to the house that he's dead. To the end of the funeral. There's not a lot of noise. There's not a lot of... It's all conversation. There's not a lot of hustle and bustle. There's a lot of people, but they're eerily quiet in this part of the movie.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean by horror movie tropes. And the way she jumps out of the box, and I think the most heart-wrenching sentence I've seen in cinema in a long time, where she jumps out of the wheelchair and she dives at the box and she says, "No, open it, he can't breathe in there."
Yeah.
I burst into tears. Like, I don't know what you were doing, but I full on burst into tears at that.
Yeah.
Because that's a mother who hasn't fully grasped that her son is dead. Like, she knows, but she doesn't know. And this film plays with... This film, that if there's one thing this film does constantly is play with what you know and what you think you know.
Yeah.
And what you understand.
Or what you know and what you know.
Yeah. And she knows, but she doesn't know, because she's not seen the body yet. And that's part of the reason I think she's so keen to bring him home. To see him, to identify him, to make sure it's him. And to then have that weaponized against her later is... Damn, I bet Horlicks are making some hella profit in the town those people live in. Because there's no other way they're sleeping at night.
Yeah.
It's very... For me, that's a heartbreaking moment, because I've done similar. Obviously, I've not lost a child to lynching, but I've been in situations where I've looked at someone and said, and my brain hasn't processed that what I'm looking at is a coffin with a body in it, or is a dead person. That I haven't quite processed that they're not alive. They're not still alive. And that I've seen so many people have that reaction to death. Like, I had that reaction when my mother died of, I thought she was still alive and started screaming for doctors to come and do CPR. Like, I totally, for a few minutes, just lost my mind. And you do that in those moments of grief because there's a part of you, there's a part of your brain that just cannot cope with the knowledge of what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And that's expected and that's normal. Now, what's also really telling is the way he's transported. And I get it. Transporting a body cross country. They're transporting by train. He's clearly not being embalmed because he stinks. And he's transported in what I think it would be generous to describe as a shipping crate.
Yeah.
Like, and again, look, a lot of rituals around death, they are not for the benefit of the dead, they are for the benefit of the living.
Yeah.
But that, I think, and again, I don't know how it was historically, but that I think is a really interesting visual commentary. He was riding, if not first class, then second class down there when he was on that train. At least until he was sent to the back halfway through.
Yeah.
he went down there in his best suit. His second best suit. He went down there dressed to the nines. And he comes back in
a
kind of shipping, not even a trunk, because a trunk would at least have like a leather look to it or something. This was a shipping crate. This was the kind of thing that you fill with hay and send bottles of beer somewhere.
Yeah.
That's what that was. And again, it's one of those blink and you miss it visual commentaries in this movie. Where the reason I'm pointing it out is because I don't know if white people are spotting this. And if you are, great. I'm talking for, I'm not saying it because I like the sound of my own voice, and I'm not assuming that you wouldn't, but coming from Jamaican culture, there's a real, and Ring will tell you, I'm very, when someone dies, it's got to be right. Like, you've got to be dressed right for the funeral. You've got to, there's a cultural attitude of, you're going to meet your maker, so you better damn well look your best.
Yeah.
And you see that in the quality of the casket he's in. Casket, not coffin. Like, she puts him in his best suit. She wears a dress he would have approved of for the funeral. And it's all geared around that. And so the idea of him being brought home, treated like cargo, in the kind of box that you probably wouldn't bother to cut up to use for firewood.
Yeah.
That's offensive to me on a deep, visceral level that I can't explain.
And, you know, they're claiming that she's, you know, turning his funeral into a freak show.
Yeah, and there's also, and again, being mixed race, I see the insides of different cultures. It's very normal to have an open casket funeral at Jamaican funerals, from the ones I've seen. In Britain, just to clarify, if I say black person in Britain, what I mean is a Jamaican person. That's what black means in the UK, in Britain generally. Like Windrush, post-Windrush generation. Although, to be fair, we also call Africans black. So, it's one of those things. But when I've been to black funerals, Jamaican funerals, it's an open casket funeral. Like, my mum's funeral was open coffin. Like, I said, I want it open. I want it, they take the coffin into the church, and the undertakers take the lid off and put it to one side until the end of the service. And that's normal. It's also, I think it might also be a Catholic thing, because my great aunt on my dad's side, who was Polish, hers was open during the service. And you have the opportunity, as in the film, to walk up to the coffin, and the idea is, as you're walking up, after the funeral, usually at the end, it's your last opportunity to say goodbye. Because once the lid goes on that box, it's not coming off again.
Yeah.
It's your last opportunity to say goodbye. A lot of people will kiss the forehead, or will, like, that's what struck me as really weird about this film. Like, about that funeral. Like, they all walked past his body. And yes, he was mangled and probably stank to high heaven and everything else. But not one of them reached out and touched his chest, or patted his chest, or kissed his forehead, or anything. I need you to understand how weird that is. That's just fucking weird. And the only reason they wouldn't do that is if their own deep, visceral horror at the state of him could not overcome a lifetime of social and cultural conditioning that says this is the last chance you've got to kiss your loved one goodbye.
Yeah.
And it was just so weird. I kept expecting his mother to lean over and kiss his forehead, or even just to stroke his hair. And they didn't touch him. And it was just so...
So, I mean...
I don't know if... Again, was that weird to you looking at it from a white perspective, Ring?
Well, It wasn't weird to me, though. Also, arguably, you could say that, arguably, when she bawled, the scene there, when she identified the body, she did bawl into his chest.
Yeah, but she's still like,
Yeah.
there was still that barrier there of she's not fully touching him. And like, even when the way the camera showed parts of him, like looked at his leg, saw bits of his face. Did you notice throughout the whole of this, we never got a full face shot of him in the box or on the slab?
Yeah.
Like, it always came at a weird angle.
Probably
For the censors.
to keep it at a PG-13.
Yeah, like I will say, like, the way the body is shown in this movie, I have no idea how this is a PG-13. Like, as I said, like, just because of the funeral and the bit with the body, like, if you cut that out, yeah, this is a PG-13 movie. I've seen my fair share of bodies in my time.
Yeah.
No, I physically, like, I don't understand how this movie was PG-13. I'm glad it's PG-13 because that broadens the audience who it's going to reach. But I think in any other movie, those images of that body being mangled like that makes it at least a 15, if not R-rated.
Well, and you have to realize that in America, there's nothing between PG-13 and R.
Yeah. Okay. So in the UK, we've got 15. So I would have said at least a 15. Yeah. But I think, again, I think there's a commentary to be made there.
As is, I'd say it's a hard PG-13 soft R.
Yeah. But I think there is something to be said there as well of, and yeah, I like, this should have been an R-rated movie, like, for that scene. I would have trouble justifying showing this to a 16-year-old. I know at 16 years old, this would have probably given me horrific nightmares. Not that I shouldn't have watched it, but someone should have. If I'd have seen it at 16, you should have sat me down and warned me first. Yeah. Even though I would have known, but not now I knew, because I wouldn't have actually known.
Yeah.
But I say that, and I say that with my whole ass chest. But then I also say, imagine the fucking irony of a movie about Emmett Till being rated such that he wouldn't have been able to go see it.
Yeah.
Which, again, I think there's a commentary to be made there on what we protect children from and what we don't.
Oh, and the the whole knowing versus knowing. Really, in my opinion, the last line of the movie, and I know there are bits that come after it, but in my opinion, that's an epilogue. In my opinion, the last lines of the movie are, "I know what the verdict is."
Yeah. So she's I'm leaving now. I know what the verdict is. The rest of it's an epilogue. Yeah. I can go with you on that, because this film's very much, it's got the structure of a book.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have the structure of a standard. It's not a 3-act movie.
Yeah.
It's like there's no beginning, middle, and end here. Well, there is, but it's so jumbled. I mean, the bridging is so
you could
seamless.
Arguably say that, like, up until the body gets returned is the first act.
Yeah.
Body being returned to the funeral is the second act. The trial is the third act, and then there's an epilogue.
Yeah, but the way the film is structured and the timing of it, if you take that as the structure, what you've just described is the structure of an opera, not the structure of a movie.
Yeah.
Like short middle act, 2 long acts either side, and an epilogue.
Yeah.
Tacked on to the end of the 3rd act. What you've just described is an opera, not a movie. And honestly, the beauty of this score, I absolutely could see this movie being an opera.
And coming from Noodle, that is high praise.
That is very high praise. But the whole film for me, by the second half, like, it very much, it builds you up and builds you up and builds you up, and then it shows you her screaming, and that's the payoff of an hour of suspense. Like, the payoff of an hour of suspense is her breaking down in the train station and her auntie breaking down next to the coffin.
Yeah.
And you're so focused on the auntie breaking down, you miss the conversation unless you're really careful. Because the auntie says, we're all moving up to Chicago.
Yeah.
And that's what bridges into the conversation of when she goes down, talks to the preacher, and finds out there was a shotgun on the wall and he did nothing.
Yeah.
But then he says, and this is the thing, like, there's a bit where he says, I don't blame him, as in I don't blame Emmett.
Yeah.
And you almost hear the silent, I blame me.
Yeah.
And you get the impression that the reason he's testifying is because he let the boy die once and he can't not try and at least get justice for that.
Yeah.
And it's this sense of, look, everyone hopes they'd be the good guy and would stand up to something. But he is right when he tells her he wasn't just facing 2 white men at the door.
Yeah.
And I think what's really, and it's touched on in this movie, but then glossed over really quickly, and I understand why, from a political point of view, because you don't want white racists jumping on the comment and making a big deal out of it, as they would. Where the comments passed of, and I'm going to use the language the film uses, there were coloured men involved. As in, there were black men involved. There were 3 black men in the back of the truck holding him down. And it's said once or twice and then immediately, like, is not commented on again. Because it's not important. It's not important that they were black men. It's really not.
Yeah.
Like, no human being should have been willing to stand and hold that poor boy down. I don't care who you are or what colour your skin is. That's...
Yeah.
But you and I both know, Ring, and this film knows, and that's why it does it the way it does, is that white racists are very good at whataboutism.
Yeah.
Yeah? You talk to a white racist about slavery and they'll say, but what about the ones who sold their own in Africa? Or you talk to white racists about black people being shot and they'll talk about, yeah, but black on black crime.
Yeah.
Or, they talk about a black person, we talk about a black person being shot by police and they'll say, yeah, but they were being threatening.
Yeah.
These white people.
Or, black person being knelt on so that they can't breathe. Oh, but he had X drug in his system.
He had a drug in his system. Yes, because police officers have got magical powers. They can tell what drugs you've got in your system by touching you. Or by looking at you. And there's, over here, like, they like to, the news will always show you a picture of, you can always tell if the person murdered by a cop is a young black man or a young non-white man, because the picture that's shared of him will be of him looking incredibly aggressive.
Yeah.
So, in the UK, there was a lad, his name was Mark Duggan, another name for you to Google. Light-skinned, but not white. Mixed race lad. was killed. And they put out the rag newspaper put out a picture of him frowning, looking like this, very angry looking. And some journalist went and found the bottom half of that picture where they'd cropped it. Because the picture, when you saw it in its entirety, was of him. Like, in the picture, he's wearing a grey hoodie and he looks angry and yeah. But when you pull out and you see the whole picture, he's holding a small heart-shaped memorial stone for his daughter's grave. But that wasn't shown. That was cropped out of the picture because it made him human and it made him decent and it explained the look on his face. And that's what we see hints of happening when we watch the second half of this movie in the trial. We see talk of, you know, this aggressive boy, this boy who grabbed a white girl, this boy who, you know, was arrogant, or was cruel to her, or said something. In Carolyn Bryant's actual testimony, she said he used a word that was unrepeatable before telling her he had other white women. That's what she testified in real life.
Yeah. Or, you know, you told him how to behave down here.
Yeah, and he didn't. The insinuation being he didn't. And one of the things they did, because, you know, they don't believe non-white people are anything but animals, they looked into Emmett Till's family history. And Emmett Till's father, and we found out, because I was curious and we found out, didn't die in action as the movie portrays. And I can completely understand why the movie didn't put this in.
Yeah.
But it's worth knowing how low the press will sink.
Well, they didn't mention how he died at all, just that he died overseas.
Yeah. And it's very carefully worded as he died overseas. He was court-martialed and sentenced to death for the rape of 2 women and the killing of a 3rd. But he offered no defense after pleading innocent.
And his defense team offered no evidence.
Yeah. And he was a private after being on active service for 2 years. Still a private.
Yeah.
In World War II. I don't know the history, but I speculate there was more going on there.
Yeah. And, you know, given how he was serving in the Italian campaign, which in terms of the American army was very much second fiddle.
Yes. So, and what the reporters did in America during the trial, they dug up this history on Emmett Till's father that his own mother didn't even know, that they hadn't told her. They just said he'd been killed for misconduct or something. Just said, they didn't give her details. They dug up this story and ran the story with the insinuation of like father, like son.
Yeah.
And those white jurors let those 2 white men walk free. Based on the testimony of that fragile, quote-unquote, white girl who, you know, made it all seem very like no one is ever going to know what really happened between Emmett Till and Carolyn Bryant. Okay? Yeah. No one's ever going to know, and she's not going to fucking admit it. And obviously there are different stories. His cousins have got one story, she's got another.
And knowing that his cousins were involved in the making of the movie, I'd say the movie probably portrays the cousin side of the story.
Yeah, I am far more inclined to believe that 14-year-old boy walked into a sweet shop, bought some candy, told the girl behind the counter that she was pretty, walked away, and when he saw her later, wolf whistled at her. I am far more inclined to believe that than any other story. Especially because Caroline Bryant has admitted since that she lied in her testimony. And that she identified him. Although she denies identifying him to the two men after they kidnapped him. She claims she tried to tell them it wasn't him and he identified himself. Look, I know the child is portrayed as innocent in the movie.
Yeah.
No one's that fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Like, even at 14 years old, innocent coming from Chicago to this, no one's that stupid. He's been held at gunpoint by two men who are calling him every slur under the sun and asking a white girl if she recognizes him. He ain't stupid enough to identify himself to her.
Yeah.
He is not gonna. How would he identify himself in that situation? The only way he identifies himself there is by begging with her, tell them I didn't touch you.
Yeah.
But it begs the question, like, there's no, like, her entire defense rests on she tried to help him after they'd kidnapped him. The point is, her story is why they kidnapped him in the first place. Yeah. And once they kidnapped him, he could have been a reincarnation of Jesus Christ himself. He was still dead.
Yeah.
He could have been so innocent, angels came down to stand over him, and he was still dead. And she has lived a life after that. And this film does have an axe to grind with. Like, it makes no secret of the fact that it has an axe to grind with her. It makes a point of panning to her at certain points during the trial, looking self-righteous and smirking. And yeah.
And, like, all props to the actress cast.
Yeah.
Like, she does a great job just, like, giving snide looks.
Yes, she's very good at snide looks. And she's very good at that sort of imperiousness people have when they believe they are superior.
Yeah. No, like, seriously, that look that she gives Emmett when he puts his hand in the candy jar.
Yeah. And the thing is, right, and that's what this film is really good at. And it does it not just with her, it does it in other moments as well. Like, I have not seen many films that make microaggressions obvious enough that white people can see them. Like, and I'm sure, like, there's things like, when I talk about him putting his hand in the candy jar, like, even if you don't have the kind of history I have where I know that's why the white person's looking at him like that, you can still watch this movie and know she doesn't like that he did that.
Yeah.
Like, well, you can still see the look on her face.
I mentioned the look that she gives him.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the way people look at his mother when she goes shopping, or, you know, the way white people speak to her, or all of that. It's all built in. And it's in that context, like, when the mother decided she was going for the trial, right? Look, I like to think I'm reasonably courageous. Like, I will stand up and say what I believe in, and I will take the heat for it. She is by far a braver person than I will ever be to have gone for that trial.
Yeah.
Because her life was absolutely on the line. And it absolutely would have sparked a race war. But her life was absolutely on the line because at this point, the whites down there had no reason to think they wouldn't win that war. Like, the kid with the toy gun, I think, says it all. The fact that, and it's that superior attitude of, we are better than you. We can play with your lives and your fears.
Yeah.
Like, we teach our children that you are nothing more than a joke and a toy to play with. And that your fear for your lives is fair game to play with.
Yeah.
That's the commentary that's going on there with the little white boy with the toy gun. The BB gun or whatever the hell it is.
Possibly a jab at Rittenhouse.
Oh yeah, definitely. But still a brave move to go down there. Like, I'm sure I'd go to that town now.
Yeah.
And I'm white passing. At this point, I'm more than white passing. I'm paler than you are. At this point, I'm not so much white passing as Dracula passing. Yeah. But you know, it's a brave move, and I think it is a move only a grieving mother can make.
Yeah.
Like, let's not pretend otherwise here. Like, you've got to be some kind of crazy to put yourself in that situation.
Yeah.
And the only way you're some kind of crazy and put yourself in that situation is if you are grieving. Because grief does funny things to you. Like, grief... I can absolutely believe that people lose their minds in grief.
And
never done that, got the t-shirt. But the way she does it, because she is very gently, but it is deliberate and you can see it. She's very much led into her position as a civil rights leader and as a speaker.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't give it, like, and this is no slight on the woman. She did not give a shit about anything but bringing her boy home and getting justice for her boy.
Yeah.
And she didn't have to. And it just so happened to be that the right people at the right time were there saying the right things to get her to just blow it open.
Yeah. And also, like, all the props to Danielle Deadweiler. Because, like, you can see, like, on her face the moment that, like, in the scene where she breaks down over the body, you can see the moment, like, you can see on her face the moment where her grief
turns to steel.
Yeah, turns into, well, I was gonna say turns into a fire.
Well, yeah, it does, and it's the moment she goes from grieving and lost and horrified to fuck this, fuck the system, and if I have to bring the whole fucking thing down, so be it.
Yeah.
And look, we all sat here and watched January 6th. We have all probably had something akin to that feeling of, you know, just tear it down, just tear it down. Like, and everyone will have that thing in their life that you will look at and you will say, enough. And that was her line. And we lionize people who get involved in civil rights movements for purely altruistic reasons. Like, who never had a loss or never had a catalyzing incident and who were just naturally politically aware and politically involved. And yeah, great. Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. Have a cookie. But, like, realistically, most people get involved in most causes because it's personal.
Yeah.
And again, this is another thing this film shows really well. It makes it personal to her. She even says it outright. She says, it wasn't my business until it was.
Yeah. Yeah, and her speech in the epilogue.
Yeah. And I think that's such a... You know, every time there's racial unrest or ethnic unrest or religious unrest or anti-LGBT unrest, people, as they do, they trot out the nice little poem of, you know, first they came for this and you did not speak up, and who's going to speak up for you? Darling, people don't speak up until it's personal. You don't make people speak up for a cause without giving them a reason to. Like, I like to think I am reasonably woke. Reasonably, I'm learning. I cock up. We all do it. But, and I'm sure, Ring, you've got the same. I don't know someone of every minority ever. You know, I'm sure if I suddenly got a pet pig, I'd probably give up pork after a month. But I don't. You know, I was always, you know, would I be the same person if I hadn't grown up mixed race LGBT with a Catholic background in a church in England?
Yeah.
Probably not. Like, people are a product of their environment and of who and what they value.
Yeah.
Like, Ring, if you still identified as cis, and if you hadn't joined the YouTube atheist community and got to know Jen and got to know Jenny and all these other people who are transgender or non-binary, do you think you'd care quite as much as you do?
I'll go one further. I'll wait until you're done drinking and then go one further.
Why are you about to make me do a spit take?
Like, probably, like, if I hadn't met you, I'd probably still be at least a soft homophobe.
Yeah, but we grow, we learn. You know, if I hadn't have realised I was bisexual at 13, I'd probably still be a homophobe.
Yeah.
It became personal, so I grew up and got over myself. You know, and got over the Catholic indoctrination.
I mean, I'd probably still be, you know, an atheist, but because that was, I mean, they were interconnected, but they were separate enough. Like, my reasons for deconverting were still separate enough that I'd probably still be an atheist.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. Look, we are not born perfect. We are not born woke. It's a process. And, you know, I occasionally have to check myself when I see people use neopronouns, because despite genuinely not caring and be like, you do you, enjoy, what are they? Just tell me how to conjugate them properly. And that being my deeply held belief that I don't care what your pronouns are, just tell me how to conjugate them properly.
Yeah, tell me how to pronounce them.
Yes, how to pronounce them, how to conjugate them, and I will absolutely defend your right to use any ones you like. Because you are your identity, and I will die on that hill. It's still a teeny tiny part of me that scoffs when I see some Gen Zer on TikTok with some neopronoun I've never seen before. That's not who I am. That's not who I am as a person. But at some point, that's who I was, because that's who I was raised to be. And I've had to unlearn that and do the work to get to the point where, yes, my immediate might be a scoff, but I don't let them see that. And what they see is me saying, no, you do you. How do I conjugate it? Because that's what I want to present to the world. In the same way, people who know me. I still have people ask me really intrusive questions about my race. Really intrusive.
Where are you
and
really
my ethnicity and my background. Where are you really from? Yeah, I wish I could say that was the worst of it. You know, I have, and Ring, don't blow your top. I have genuinely had people say to me, oh, so if it's straight on top, does that mean it's an afro down there? Yeah. Like when they find out I'm part Jamaican, oh, does that mean it's an afro down there? Like, the fuck are you? You know? And those kind of comments, like, I'm sure that anyone who's ginger has been asked at some point if the drapes match the curtains. That's not a good thing to say to someone. You know, I've had, you know, even, and I get it from both sides. I get black people demanding to see my forearm, and I get white people telling me that these foreigners are coming to our country and stealing our jobs. And I'm like, oi, I'm Johnny Foreigner too, you know. I get it from both sides as a mixed race person. But it's who you present yourself as to the world. And the point is that the causes you believe in, generally, are the causes that are closest to your heart.
Yeah.
And they're closest to your heart because they affect someone who is in your heart.
Yeah.
Like, would I generally care all that much about how atheists are treated in the public school system in America if Ring was not an atheist and I didn't have a lot of atheist friends? No. Would I generally, like, I donate to the PDSA, but doesn't mean I'm going to stop eating beef. I've got some lamb in the fridge for later. You know? And yeah, I know someone at work, her boyfriend's a farmer. She won't eat lamb because she's seen them and they're cute. It's personal to her. She's had a pet lamb. It's personal to her. You know, in the same way, you probably couldn't pay me to eat dog meat.
Yeah,
it's personal to me.
Like, call me horrible all you want, but I'd probably still eat pork if I had a pet pig.
Mm. I mean, to be fair, the pig would probably still eat pork if you had a pet pig.
Yeah.
They'll eat anything, you know. But the point I'm making and trying to drive home is she didn't care until it was her son and her life in the firing line. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. And just if you are one of those people who maybe feels a little bit guilty because you didn't care before something happened to you, and because there is a culture that says that you must know and must be completely woke at all times and always progressive and know and never have to be taught and never have to learn. And if you were ever anything other than a shining virtuous example of pure wokeness, that you are somehow wrong or you are evil in some way or that you are irredeemable. You're not. But anyone who tells you that they've never had to go through a learning process to be politically progressive is a liar. Is a liar.
Yeah.
Because the point of being progressive is that you're constantly progressing. So if you stay in one spot and you're not learning, you are eventually going to fall behind. And what I really love about this movie is she goes from genuinely not caring to saying to her own mother, those people down there, as if they are not her own people.
Yeah.
And her mother calls her out on it at the start of the movie when she says, those people down in Mississippi, those black people down in Mississippi are not like us. And the mother says, you mean those people like me?
Yeah.
Calls her out on it. Right. She goes from that to standing up in New York City and making a speech about how there is equality for all or there is equality for none.
Yeah.
Because her son was killed.
Which kind of, you know, weirdly enough ties into the previous movie of, you know, until everyone's free, no one is.
Yes. And if you think that that's not a deliberate, like, parallel,
Yeah.
like, that statement, until all are free, none are free, is very much a rallying cry of civil rights movements everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, that's what that means. You know, that's up there with no taxation without representation.
Yeah.
If America has one good export, it's definitely pithy, like, quotes and things.
I mean, it's why we've got so many good orators.
Yeah, I mean, America does turn out a good orator, I will give you that. They don't necessarily always talking right or decent,
Yeah.
but what they're saying might not be good, but the way they say it is spot on. You know, I'm sure the sophists would be proud. And there's a line you picked out of this movie that is so important, and I want to dig into it. You picked it out in this movie when they said to her, when she kicked up a fuss, and they said to her, "It's just an ordinary criminal affair in Mississippi."
No, it was a
Oh no, when it was said on the radio or whatever it was.
Yeah. Turning, like is something like, her and the NAACP,
NAACP.
NAACP kicking up a national storm over just an ordinary criminal affair in Mississippi.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, right, ordinary affairs are what radicalize people everywhere. And just as those words have come out of my mouth, I'm just going to say them again. Ordinary, everyday events are what radicalize people everywhere. We know that. We discussed this last week, I think, as well, and the week before. We know this. Like, I know we discussed it when we did Superman. People are not radicalised by one-off atrocities. Well, they are, but not in anywhere near the same numbers.
Yeah.
Like, because one and done, you can almost hand wave it as a blip.
Yeah.
People are radicalised and people get politically active and politically responsive when they see the same thing happening over and over again and nothing is done about it. When it's normal, when it's ordinary, that's when your radicals start kicking in. Like, it, you know, again, let's talk about it in the context of the war on terror.
Yeah.
People weren't being radicalised in Iraq and Afghanistan until soldiers were already on the ground.
Yeah.
Because then it's normal that there are people shooting at them and bombing them and all these other things.
Yeah.
That's what radicalises them. Not the one-off boom and done. The repetition. That, you know, if you want to talk about the troubles on the West Bank right now, people in the West Bank are not being radicalised because there's only been one attack and that's it. They're being radicalized because this is a war that's gone on for decades.
Yeah.
On both sides. And that's all I'm going to say on that, because look, if you don't know what my sympathies are in that by now, like, you've not been paying attention, but I'm not going to go into it.
You either haven't been paying attention or you're new.
Yeah. Now, what this film teases out and makes, I think, a bigger deal of them than it probably was in the 50s, but it's definitely a big deal now. They talk about it being this ordinary criminal affair, and then the idea that, you know, they say she has an insurance policy out on her son as if it's planned. Like, they're basically accusing her of insurance fraud.
Yeah. Well, and there was that, you know, sheriff opining about believing a conspiracy theory that he's really alive and she's cooked it up with the NAACP.
Yeah, like, all of this is that's a very modern view of events. Like, you know, the conspiracy theories that somehow maybe the George Floyd thing. I heard a couple of conspiracies where people were saying, you know, maybe it was deliberate to try and spark a race war. Yeah, like, maybe BLM did it deliberately to get to be on the front pages.
Something Alex Jones, Sandy Hook.
Yeah. And that willingness to believe conspiracy theories, particularly from people who were part of the establishment, a white sheriff, it's nothing new, and I can absolutely believe that's what they said at the time. But also, I think more of it was made in this film, because as a modern audience, that's what we expect.
Yeah.
But this comment of it was just an ordinary criminal affair. That's gaslighting. That's racial gaslighting, and that happens all the time. We saw it with George Floyd. We saw it with Breonna Taylor. I keep saying those two names because those are the two that are stuck in my head. I know there were others. And we see it in the UK as well. Like, you know, police will kill someone and then plant a weapon in the car or plant drugs in the car. Again, Google it.
But, you know, well, now see, you're taking it as gaslighting, and I latched onto the line because that's the fucking problem.
Yeah, that is the problem, but it's very dismissive, and the whole point is that the way it's worded and the way it's put is, yes, that's the problem, but the gaslighting comes in because when you try and say, but yes, that's the problem, you're dismissed and minimized, and it's just an ordinary criminal affair. And that's why it took until 2022 for an anti-lynching law to be on the federal books.
Yeah. And, you know, an anti-lynching law bearing Emmett Till's name.
Yeah. And this is what she did really well. Like, Stephen Lawrence's mother did the same in the UK. Like, they decided that their boys' names were not going to fade into ignominy. Because she could have very well, like, she could have absolutely, and no one would have blamed her if she let them bury him in Mississippi, left the body there and just dropped it. Not even pushed for a trial. No one would have blamed her. Plenty of people did it. And again, she is a product of her environment. She lives and works in Chicago. She has a good life.
Yeah.
She believed that this couldn't possibly happen to her. There's a level of superiority or belief in your own self-worth. Because it's not necessarily superiority, but it is a self-worth. There's a level of self-worth required to look at a situation that you are in and say, that's not fair. I deserve better.
Yeah.
And that's why she was different, because she said, no, my boy was from Chicago. My boy wasn't like them down there. He didn't know the area. He was not, culturally part of that area. My boy deserved better. And there's a level of selfishness in that. And even like to the point where she's saying, I just want my boy home. I just want justice for my boy. And then someone talked to her and talked her into seeking justice, not just for her boy, but for all the people who were killed. Reverend Lee. What was the other name they kept dropping? And 2 lynchings they kept talking about.
Yeah, I can.
Reverend Lee and the other one.
Yeah. Curtis Brown.
Might be, yeah. And those were politically motivated. And what the NAACP did with her is they took her rage and her grief and that tiny spark of madness that sent her down to Mississippi for the trial. Like, because that's not, this is madness. And they weaponized that. And she allowed them to weaponize that. And she allowed them to, I think, gently encourage her to see past the fact that it was her son and to see it on a broader scale. And it's one of those things where, they work for an insurance company and she, the great, a beautiful moment of just poetic irony of the town they were going to, Sumner, a good place to raise a boy.
Yeah.
Blink and you miss it on the sign. Oh, that hits different 2/3 of the way into this film.
Yeah.
And the guy she's going to see in an life insurance building. Again, with the dark humor in this movie.
Yeah.
Like, this movie's got, like, as dark as it is, as hard-hitting as it is, this movie's got some really funny moments. Did you notice this? Like, there's just some really funny moments in it. Like, objectively, that girl standing up in the courtroom, bending at the waist and doing like she's frigging being a pigeon in a Blues Brothers song is objectively funny. That is just objectively funny. That is comedic to look at.
Yeah.
And it's only the context that makes it not funny.
Yeah.
Like, the irony of going to a town where you are probably going to be murdered if you go out after dark and meeting someone outside a life insurance office.
Yeah.
That's objectively funny. That is just objectively funny. This, even to an extent, the irony of how he was transported back.
Yeah.
You've got to have a really dark sense of humor. But, he's brought back on the railway it's just objectively weird.
Or how he beeped when he should have bopped is like a song that like ties like all the acts together.
Yeah, like he beeped when he should have bopped. What the fuck kind of song is that? That's just objectively, that is a monkey in the corner banging cymbals funny. Like, it's that dramatic irony. And it's just, because that's what life is, right? That is what life is. Like, it's horror and it's grief and it's viciousness and violence and hatred and all of that. But also sometimes it is just fucking funny.
Yeah.
And it's funny in that way of, I'm going to hell for laughing.
Yeah.
but and it's one of those, if I don't laugh, I'll cry. Like when I saw that sign for Sumner, a good place to raise a boy, in a movie about Emmett Till, I flat out cackled. Because I think by that point in the movie, I had so much emotion built up inside me. I just needed the cathartic release.
Yeah.
More than anything else. But I full on cackled at that. I was just like, that's brilliant. Like, who came up with that? Because that was not an accidental shot. Like, that was deliberate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, like, even they get shot at by the child, and yet they're the ones who get the aggressive pat down outside the courtroom.
Yeah.
Like, I'm angry at that, but there's also part of me that's just like, what the fuck did you expect? It's Mississippi.
Yeah.
And it's, the judge asking for a Coke. Like, these things are dark.
Or, hopefully this will be right over. What do you want to do later?
Yeah, hopefully this won't take too long.
Yeah, hopefully this won't take too long.
Like, it's just the depths of the darkness of humanity are objectively funny. They just are. Okay, they really are. And you can get angry at those things or you can laugh at those things, and the two are not mutually exclusive. Like, those things made me angry watching this movie. Yeah. But I look back on them and I sort of, that it's actually, it's fun. In that dark gallows humour, in this kind of humour that Ring will, I'm sure, back me up when I say that soldiers have when they're in the middle of a deployment. Yeah. It's a very dark.
Or, when Emmett's in the cotton field,
And the joke is, boy doesn't know where his clothes are coming from, doesn't know why he'd get a whooping.
No.
Go on.
Coming from the depths of the ancient tomb, it's the mummy.
Yeah. Like, just yeah. Like, the kid does clearly not grasp the situation he's in. Yeah. But even, like, when the old man there says, boy wouldn't know what earned him a whooping.
Yeah.
And the preacher is actively joking about slavery in a field full of black people picking cotton.
Yeah.
That is objectively funny. It just is. And then, like, even in the courtroom, when she bends over and she's like, he held my hands here and also had a hand on my hip. Like, hang on, darling, how many hands has he got?
Yeah.
And just these things, I think what this film does, it's really hard to sum this film up because it is just, it's a slice of life.
Yeah.
And I think in that regard, it's really difficult to draw this to a close and be like.
Well, like I said, it is basically two separate movies seamlessly stitched together.
Absolutely seamless. Like, and it takes all the tropes you expect and plays with them. Like, the first half of the movie is a horror movie and a psycho thriller. And yet and then that bit of the movie, that suspense, literally has him making the mummy joke in a cotton field.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, has Emmett Till making a joke about how he's the mummy.
Yeah, like, that's fucking dark.
Yeah.
And, like, it plays with a lot of dark humour. And, like, the funeral is very Christian, very black Christian. Like, I recognise that layout of that church and the way the choir are dressed. Like, that's familiar to me.
Yeah.
But it's quiet. This movie plays well with sound. A lot. It does a lot with sound. And, like, the score, again, spot fucking on.
Like,
she got the Oscar.
Yeah.
But also plays with silence.
If you want to be angry, like as angry as I am, Till didn't even get a nomination. The winner was the German remake of All Quiet on the Western Front that only showed at one film festival and then immediately got put on Netflix.
I haven't seen that yet.
No, neither have I. But like I said, it's like, and I had to like dig to I had to like try like 3 different searches to even figure out when it was released.
And it's like this film is normally, right, we get to this stage in the stream and we start talking about, okay, so what's your final takeaway from this movie? No, my takeaway from this movie is life's a bitch, then you die, and some of us are just going to get lucky enough that we're going to see someone else die and have the opportunity to stand up and make life a little bit less bitchy. And that's what you should take away from this for my money. Like, don't wait for it to be your child. Because that's the message this movie's sending. Also, Carolyn Bryant should go to prison. I don't care that she's 88 years old. Yeah. She should go to prison. But what I love about this movie is like there's bits of this movie where it's so familiar to me. Like, I grew up in black culture, Jamaican culture, and it's very similar to African American culture, even down to the way the grandmother decorated her house. Like, there's a point where the grandmother is sat on the bed, and I genuinely messaged Ring and like, I've got a photograph of my grandmother wearing that exact dress. Like, it's just so familiar to me. The way the women react, the way they grieve, culturally the way they behave as a group. Like, they'd hear bad news and the neighbours who don't even know them show up on her doorstep with a bowl. Like, and her house is full of people. That is, like, yeah. That's so familiar to me. And it's so, I honestly, to those it's not familiar to, like, you're missing out because Jamaican and African American cooking. But it's, I say that flippantly, but it's nice to see a culture I'm familiar with that's not white represented on screen. And not in a, oh, look at me, aren't we good, we're showing representation. But just as a, no, this is how we live, fucking deal with it.
Yeah.
Like, at no point is it, like, the women rule the family in this movie. And you see that, the mother and the daughter rule their families. And the men do as their wives tell them, not the other way around. Like, even her own father asks her permission to come with her to Mississippi.
Yeah.
That's how black culture is. Like, the boys, the way they talk to their mothers, the way the mothers talk to each other, the way the women talk to the men, and even to, you know, calling the preacher and his wife auntie and uncle.
Yeah.
Cash money, they are not her auntie and uncle. Cash money. They are her older, much older, probably siblings or cousins. Cash money. But she's known from the age of 3 years old to call them auntie and uncle. From when, as soon as she learned to talk, she was calling them auntie and uncle.
Yeah.
And Emmett will have grown up learning the same. And any cousin who's more than 5 years older than him is uncle. And any cousin younger than 5 years than him, he's their uncle. Because that's how that culture works.
Yeah.
That's just a thing. But it's so nice to... And it's such a weird film for me to get that sense from. Like, the fact that I'm even using the word nice in the same sentence as a movie about the murder of Emmett Till.
Yeah.
Like, people are gonna think I've gone scatty if they don't see this film. Definitely see this film. I've not gone scatty, I promise. But this film it's unapologetically black. It's like, it's unapologetically not white. Like, it doesn't apologise for its women screaming and crying in grief. It doesn't apologise for its men doing what their wives tell them. It doesn't apologise for its boys being taught how to tie a tie by their mothers and how to, dress a certain way and behave a certain way. It doesn't apologise for those cultural things. It doesn't apologise for being black. It neither apologises nor tokenises. And do you know what? Okay, this is a film about Emmett Till, and the subject is horrific, horrendous. I will be having thoughts about this for a week. But when last did you see a movie that had more black people in it than white people? Don't say Wakanda Forever.
So you mean a movie that wasn't directed by Ryan Coogler?
Yeah. I think I can name 3 movies that have more black people than white people in it.
Yeah.
But that's what life looks like. And it's this movie is very much, it's a character study of a woman. This movie is called Till, but make no mistake, this is Mammy's story. It's not Emmett's story, it's her story. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because her story is his story.
Yeah.
But when you watch it, and you watch it for her story, don't forget its context. Don't forget that this story is as much the story of Mammy Till as it is George Floyd's family. And this film's... I'm trying to sum this film up, but there's so much going on in the film that it's impossible to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the point. This film is not something you can sum up with a few pithy lines in the New York Times about what movie to see this Saturday.
Yeah.
It's not what this movie's for. This movie is designed to sit... You're supposed to sit with this movie, and this movie is designed to sit with you.
Yeah.
You will not be the same person you were at the start of the 2.5 hours watching this film.
So I'll give my best stab at it, to sum it up in 3 bullet points, and also to tie it in with the theme, with our theme this month. 1, I acknowledge I am saying this as someone who hasn't seen Schindler's List, but this is the Schindler's List of the civil rights movement.
As someone who has seen Schindler's List and will be fixing that, folks, don't worry. Yeah. Very
2,
much so.
Both the cinematography and the score are fucking phenomenal and carry the weight of this movie as it should.
Yeah.
And then 3, like it or not, Confederates, this is your legacy.
Yeah. One thing I will add to that is this movie says more with silence than I've said ranting for the last 2.5 hours. So go watch it. And I think I think that's...
Oh, yeah. This is definitely not a movie to just put on in the background. You have to watch it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is told via the cinematography and the score.
Yes. Bring tissues.
Yeah.
If you don't cry at this movie, or at the very least, I know Ring's not much of a cry, so I don't know if Ring outright cried at this movie.
No, I didn't. I got a little choked up at some scenes, but I didn't. There weren't any actual tears.
Yeah. If you're not getting choked up at this movie, you're not paying attention. Yeah.
So, next week, we're going to lighten things up with a live deconstruction of an episode of Atunche's YouTube series, Checkmate Lincolnites.
palate cleanser. We did say. So yeah, checkmate Lincolnites. I have no idea what this is, what its context is. All I have is the title and the mental images Scummer doing the impression.
Yeah. Do you want to react to it blind, or do you want me to send you the episode?
I want to react to it blind because I think that will be more interesting.
Okay. Now the one if I remember right, there are. Do you want to, like, how blind do you want to be?
Give me a broad overview of what it is I'm watching with no spoilers or anything. Just is it satire? Is it this? Is it that?
Oh,
What's
it's satire.
Its premise?
It's satire.
Satire. Presumably, it's Confederates trying to justify. Like the satire is that they're
like
fucking stupid. But
like
yeah,
for those of you who don't know what Checkmate Lincolnites is Aton Shea plays two characters, Billy Yank and Johnny Reb. And it's him sitting, it's these two characters sitting across each other, having a discussion about various topics in the Civil War. And and to defend against straw manning, there's a running gag where Aton Shea will take comments from neo-Confederates that are submitted in previous videos and work them into the script and show the comment on screen as Johnny Reb is spouting it off.
it's gonna be fun.
Yeah,
it's gonna be fun. Yeah, I would have loved to react to that.
Unfortunately, we're not using the episode that has the most in-your-face satire, which is a sequence in which Johnny Reb becomes possessed with the Nazi character and then has to be exorcised by the Witchfinder General.
Wait, didn't that happen on Supernatural once?
Yeah. But I think it has a bit of like Confederate Nazi linkage satire at the end.
I mean, that's not a difficult leap to make. Let's be clear here. But yeah, it sounds fun. We'll find out how witty we are live. Which should be fun. And you know me, I'm always game for a good satire. Deconstructing a good satire.
Because I didn't realize that April had 5 Sundays. We're gonna finish off with the Free State of Jones.
I mean, at this point, Ring, April's got more Sundays than the Confederacy had. I mean, it's close.
Yeah.
But yeah, Free State of Jones to finish off, which should be good. I think that was when I picked up on, wasn't it? I literally Googled anti-Confederate movies and that popped up. So, yeah, looks good.
So, and with that, instead of going with my usual tagline, I'm going to say sometimes the job of a good storyteller is to rub your face in an issue and ask, why aren't you asking any questions?
Yep. And as always from me, take care, be good, and if you can't be good, remember, use your noodle.